Hi, everyone. Welcome and good afternoon, good morning, wherever it is you're tuning in from. My name is Hayla Alawi, and on behalf of Atmosphere Press, I am so pleased to welcome you to today's live author reading of Family Psychology. We'll be hearing from David Grant reading from the novel What Are We Going to Do with Tyrone Jr., released on April 4th. Irene Sullivan reading from the nonfiction text Born and Raised to Murder, A Failure of Foster Care, released June 18th, and Rebecca Block and Grace Edwards reading from their co-authored text, Can You Help Me Give a Shit? Unlocking Teen Motivation in School and Life, released on July 9th. All four authors' books, the three books, can be purchased from online retailers and from select bookstores. And of course, the books can be ordered on Atmosphere Press's website. That's at atmospherepress.com/books. We'll also have a link to What Are We Going to Do with Tyrone Jr., which is not published by Atmosphere, but we are representing this book. Please see the links that I will put in the chat now. At the end of today's event, we are going to have time for your questions. So during the readings, if you have a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type that in the chat and I'll make sure it gets asked. And then please stay muted for the duration of the event, but feel free to use the chat for any praise and comments. One last note is that we at Atmosphere Press appreciate your support today and always. So if you have a manuscript of your own, we would love to read it. Submit your work today to books@atmospherepress.com. Again, thank you so much for supporting David, Irene, Rebecca, and Grace today. We'll be starting with our first reader, who is David Grant. David is a career military officer with notable assignment locations that include the Pentagon, the United States Military Academy, and Fort Stewart, Georgia. Parent of an adult with special needs, David understands firsthand many of the challenges parents and families go through during their unique journeys. David loves helping people achieve their dreams and goals. He holds a bachelor's degree in American politics from the U.S. Military Academy. David earned a master's degree in management from the University of Maryland, University College, a master's degree in national resource strategy from the National Defense University, and a doctoral degree in business administration from North Central University. To know more about David, visit his website, davidsbookcase.com, and be sure to check out his debut novel, The Other Side of Friendship, which is also available as an audiobook narrated by Adam Gold. Today, we'll be hearing David read from What Are We Going to Do with Tyrone Jr., in which devoted parents Tyrone and Crystal Washington are doing the best they can to seek support for their adult son, Tyrone Jr., who has autism. But the odds simply feel as if they are too much to overcome. Between a military deployment for Tyrone, police involvement with their son, and unforeseen events, Tyrone and Crystal are determined to take steps in order to answer the question, what are we going to do with Tyrone Jr.? Let's welcome David.
Thank you, Haley. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. For today's reading from my book, What Are We Going to Do with Tyrone Jr., which is dedicated to the most special people. For today's reading, I'm going to read a few pages from chapter 1, and also going to read from page 205. And I selected these portions because the portions I'm going to read were parts that I really enjoyed writing, that I felt were really enjoyable to write and very powerful. So with no further ado, chapter 1, where is he? Tyrone, get back here. Stop running, I yelled while gasping for air. My son was fast and filled with energy. His long legs easily carried him as he ran throughout the mall. With each stride, he increased his distance away from me. I just couldn't keep up. Heads turned in his direction as he zigzagged through the crowd of patrons who were simply trying to mind their own business on a lazy afternoon. Unexpectedly, Tyrone Jr. and I became the main attraction. Look at that man running, Mommy. Did he steal something? Asked the young girl with blonde pigtails. She grabbed her mother's hand as Tyrone Jr. encroached on their personal space. The mother pulled the little girl even closer as he ran past them, causing the little girl's blonde hair to drift in the air. The mother and daughter remained laser focused on him as he disappeared into the distance. Where did he go? I scanned the numerous corridors in the mall. There was no sign of my son. Where could he be? This wasn't his first time running away from me in public, but normally he returned within a few minutes. Why didn't I hold his hand more tightly today? I stopped to catch my breath and felt the lactic acid flow throughout my body. My lungs continued to struggle while trying to suck in more air. I needed, I needed to breathe. I took a deep breath as I noticed the room gradually starting to turn black. I was on the verge of passing out. Should I call Crystal? I imagined her shocked voice reverberating through my ears as I tried to explain how I lost our only son. For years, Crystal and I talked about purchasing a GPS tracking monitor so we could locate Tyrone Jr. during an emergency. We procrastinated. Until this incident, these types of emergencies never happened to us. To make matters worse, I could no longer simply pick up Tyrone Jr. and put him over my shoulder. His 6 foot, 180-pound body was too much for me to handle. Having finally caught my breath, I wiped the sweat from my forehead. 3 police officers quickly approached me. What do the cops want? Perhaps they saw me running through the mall, but that's not a crime. My heart rapidly pounded against my chest as I remembered the half dozen times police officers eagerly pulled me over while I drove in my own neighborhood. Each traffic stop was the result of mistaken identity. For some reason, law enforcement always seemed to think I fit the description of a suspect, an armed suspect. From being forced to provide identification while on my own property to being asked why I was taking a leisurely morning stroll in my upscale neighborhood, I had had enough of police officers disrupting my humdrum life. After spending one night in the county jail while the police tried to confirm my identity, I realized they would never look out for my best interests. This encounter would likely be no different. In a matter of seconds, the police officers were right in front of me. I could read each of their name tags. The officer that appeared to be the leader of the group had the name Lieberman on his tag. He looked familiar, but at the moment, I couldn't pinpoint exactly how I may have known him. All that mattered was that hopefully he would have an open mind and listen to my situation. I just wanted to find my son and go home. I took a deep breath and prepared to talk to the officers, but before I could say a word, the group unexpectedly walked by me as if I was invisible. From Officer Lieberman's radio, a voice asked, "So, when are you guys getting here? We want to start eating." Relieved that the cops wanted nothing to do with me, I realized that I still had a big problem. Where was Tyrone Jr.? I reached into my pocket to grab my vibrating phone. Precious moments were already being wasted while I attempted to gain my bearings. A picture of my beautiful wife, Crystal, appeared on the screen. Finally, my finger swiped ignore. Crystal couldn't possibly be having a worse day than I was having at the time. "Hey, this area is for kids only," a female voice yelled from the floor below me. The lady's voice grew louder as she repeated herself. I said, "This playground is for children only. Look at the sign, you're too big." I scrambled to the railing and looked over at the first floor. Practically right below me was the children's play area. The red slides, green foam pit, and blue animal shapes were the perfect objects for attracting children of all ages. As I peered over the railing, kids smiled and laughed while they jumped and hopped on the numerous contraptions. One impatient little boy with red hair and freckles gave the girl ahead of him a slight nudge. She quickly went down the slide. The little boy giggled with glee as his turn to go down the slide finally arrived. In another part of the play area, a little girl jumped from a miniature treehouse into a pile of foam cubes. In big green letters, a nearby sign read, "No jumping." Obviously, nobody seemed to care about the rules, especially the kids. But in all this commotion, where was Tyrone Jr.? A security guard and a middle-aged woman with long blonde hair walked toward the play area. She was clearly agitated, as her eyes and mouth were both tense, giving her a stern expression. The woman's pace quickened as she got closer to the play area. "There he is," she yelled at the security guard, pointing to a small tunnel beneath a bridge in the fun zone. The security guard caught up to the woman, slowly bent down, and peered into the tunnel. His eyes squinted as if he was looking for a needle in a haystack. He's a grown man. I told him to leave, but he just sat there. It's not safe for these kids. The woman pleaded her case to the security guard. Tyrone Jr.'s black and gold Converse sneakers became fully visible. I ran to the nearest stairway and made my way toward the play area. I should have known that he would have ended up among the kids. He always loved the foam pits and slides. Crystal and I constantly reminded him that he was too big for the kiddie play area. He's my son, I hollered as I approached the security officer and the lady with the blonde hair. He's my son. Clearly agitated by his noncompliance, the blonde woman and the security guard continued to order Tyrone Jr. out of the tunnel. His Converse sneakers were still visible as he lay on the floor within the tunnel. No longer patient, the guard snatched the communication radio from his black holster on his hip. He gruffly spoke, "Backup is needed in the children's play area on the first floor. I say again, I need backup at the children's play area. There's a non-compliant black male who refuses to leave the children's play area." As if he was waiting for my arrival, the moment Tyrone Jr. saw me, he said, "White car, home." If he could better verbalize it, I knowed he'd say, "What took you so long to find me, Daddy? I've been waiting for you." His pearly white teeth lit up the tunnel as he grinned from ear to ear. "Oh, Tyrone Jr., don't you realize that you're no longer the cute little toddler that even strangers love? You're a grown man now, 25 years old. You can't play with the little kids anymore, especially during these times in America," I thought. Without hesitation, Tyrone Jr. took my hand and led me toward the mall exit. I paused for a moment and put both arms around him and held him tight. I felt his heartbeat against my shirt. Wow. He must have been anxious while waiting for me to find him. "Come on, let's go home now," I said. "Yes, white car home." He waited for a moment, then repeated, "White car home." We took our time walking toward the exit. After all, both of us had already done enough running for the day and probably for the entire month. As we pushed the door to depart the mall, a bolstering voice came over what sounded like a bullhorn. "Stop right there! Stop right there! We need you to come with us." With a smirk on her face, there stood the blonde woman from the kiddie play area, along with the security guard and 3 police officers. One of the officers placed his right hand on his pistol holster as if he was preparing for action. Tyrone Jr. and I weren't going anywhere. And that's the end of chapter 1. And next, I'd like to read a few paragraphs from chapter 27, page 205, for those of you who have the book. Sitting outside on the deck also helped me to cope with Tyrone Jr.'s absence. Life was not the same without him in the house. I anxiously waited for the lawyer to return my call. "Please, doesn't she remember me?" I wondered. What's taken her so long to follow up? It had only been 24 hours since I called and sent her office an email, but this was the information age. People communicate instantly from anywhere in the world. My attention quickly focused on a squirrel that climbed up on one of the many common trees in my backyard. The agile squirrel jumped from branch to branch with his cheeks filled with nuts. Wow, his face really looks like a balloon. Watching Mr. Squirrel made me feel a bit at peace. Nature typically made me feel so alive. Maybe that's the main reason I wanted to visit Montana. I continued to watch Mr. Squirrel as he climbed higher into the trees and deeper into the brush. He had my full attention. Heck, watching him move from branch to branch was quite entertaining. He jumped and sprinted through the air with the grace of a gymnast. My phone received a text message which interrupted my moment with nature. Within seconds, another text arrived. "Ah, finally, the lawyer is returning my message," I thought. I looked down at my cell phone and immediately realized that it wasn't the lawyer who texted me. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thank you for, I mean, even with that short snippet almost from that reading, it kind of illuminates all these things and anxieties that I know are so important to the book. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
Mm. At this time, we are going to move to our next readers. So our next readers for today are Rebecca Block and Grace Edwards. Rebecca is a former professor, the co-founder of FAIR LLC, an organization that supports teens, parents, and high schools through coaching and training, and the parent of two lively sons. Grace is currently pursuing her undergraduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania, volunteers with the unhoused community, and hopes to pursue a career in the medical field. Today, these two authors who have written Can You Help Me Give a Shit together, Dr. Rebecca Block and undergraduate student Grace Edwards spoke with teens across the country about what makes a positive difference in their education. Now they share those stories alongside research in psychology and education to explore how to help young people build lasting motivation. We'll hear more now from Rebecca and Grace themselves.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. The subtitle of our book is Unlocking Teen Motivation in School and Life, and that is really the focus. I'm going to read a short passage from the introduction to the book and then hand it over to Grace to read a passage from one of the meatier chapters in the book. In New Mexico, a high school study skills teacher asked her sophomores and juniors to write down what they want to get out of her class. One writes, "Can you help me give a shit about school? I want to, but I just don't know how." In Pennsylvania, a junior questions her mom about the usefulness of school. "What's the point of these classes? Why does it matter if I learn this stuff?" Her mom, frustrated, replies, "Ask your teachers. They should be able to tell you why it matters." In North Carolina, a senior asks his math tutor why he has to learn Algebra 2 to graduate high school. The tutor Googles what jobs use advanced algebra skills and is startled to realize only 6% of jobs do. "It helps with logical thinking," she says, hoping she's right. In New Jersey, a father acknowledges that his sophomore is doing just fine academically. "But it just seems to be about compliance," he opines. "I don't care if he gets all A's. I want him to learn how to learn, and it doesn't seem like school is teaching him that." In Florida, a soon-to-be freshman questions whether he wants to do the International Baccalaureate, or IB, program, a rigorous 4-year course of study that is available at his high school. He's done well in his classes in middle school, but doesn't have a particularly strong academic drive. His mother worries IB could be too much pressure. She's read the stories of how teens are increasingly stressed out and overwhelmed, but also worries he would get bored and even more disinterested without a challenging academic curriculum. "I don't know what to encourage him to do, honestly," she confides. Online, a parent asks a Parenting of Teens Facebook group why their kid is so apathetic about school. Is there something wrong with them? Is this just the effects of COVID lingering or something else going on? Another parent responds that her son became so miserable in high school he basically withdrew to the basement of their house. "He graduated 6 months ago, but he still doesn't know what's next. I've tried to get him to see a range of options, different kinds of colleges, work, service. I don't know if I'm pushing too hard or not enough." If any of these stories ring true, you're not alone. While it's nothing new for students, especially teens, to dislike school, the cumulative effects of the last few years, COVID lockdowns, teacher and student burnout, staffing shortages, political tensions, rapid technological change, and the ever-increasing cost of college, have made schools somehow feel both highly stressful and mostly irrelevant to many students, families, and educators. For the lucky students, school only sucks occasionally. For the unlucky, it's a miserable experience every single day. Though it may be most visible in the students who are struggling academically or in those who are visibly depressed, withdrawn, or anxious, even the students we spoke with who are academically successful and not struggling with their mental health felt like school was very rarely about engaged learning and far more often about simply performing well enough to either get by or meet expectations. So then what can we do about it? There's plenty already written about how school should and could work to solve all the problems mentioned above. We're not trying to add to that impressive collection. Instead, this book is intended to help the parents and educators who are in the thick of it right now, those who are trying to figure out how to help teens navigate the next few months or years. This book is focused on how adults and teens can engage as co-pilots in the process of steering the experience of school, especially high school, away from overwhelm, disempowerment, and apathy, and towards an experience where both parents and teens can feel connected and capable. Over to you, Grace.
Thanks, Becca. I'll be reading from chapter 4, Using Their Voice, Making Choices in and Outside the Classroom. Students' problems are just adult problems for younger people. Just because they're young doesn't mean that they aren't facing real serious issues in their day-to-day lives. So acknowledge that and understand that students have their own lives, thoughts, and opinions and deserve to be treated with respect and empathy. That doesn't just go away just because they're young. A lot of them do bring a lot of intelligence and wisdom and do care a lot about their education, whether they show it or not. At the end of the day, it's hard not to care about something you're spending 40 hours a week or more doing. And oftentimes, parents feel disconnected from their kids, and a lot of teachers feel similarly. But just working with students first and coming from a place of not wanting to lecture and immediately make change, but a place to really hear them out and understand is your step zero to fixing a lot of the problems you see in education. Talk to them, ask what they're thinking about and worried about, what they're spending their time doing and why, and if they do care. Because oftentimes when students say they don't care, they actually do care a lot. It's just not about the thing they think you're asking about. Hearing students out and letting them use their voice and right to respect themselves is one of the most powerful things you can do. That's a quote from one of our participants named Connor. Facilitate change. Where you dislike, if you feel something is inadequate, perhaps do something for yourself. Perhaps suggest it to someone in the administration, whatever, just do something. Even if it doesn't work, it makes you feel better. It's another quote from our participant, Zemo. Abilities, belonging, and choices all work together to make it possible to sustain motivation. We focus on belonging first because having a foundation of connection and safety makes it possible to be curious, open, and receptive to learning new skills and mindsets, and to identifying and pursuing meaningful choices. As the previous chapters show, positive relationships with families, teachers, and peers often create meaningful opportunities for teens to make choices that matter to them and to strengthen or discover abilities they value. Abilities, belonging, and choices all affect each other so much that it's hard to talk about one without also discussing the others. However, the stories in this chapter focus first on the choices students made, whether about mindsets, classes, programs, or extracurriculars, and how those choices affected their experience of school. Choosing how to respond. Later in this chapter, we'll look at the two most common ways students can exert autonomy over their high school and college experience by choosing what they do inside their classes and what they do outside those classes. Students we spoke with made it clear over and over again that they wish they had pushed themselves to find places where they could make meaningful choices earlier and figured out how to act on those opportunities. However, not all students have the same level of choices available in or outside of class. While the structures and relationships that surround students affect just how much autonomy they actually have, there is one way everyone always has a choice, deciding their response to what happens to them. Ava. Even though the comments hurt me, I made a point to forget about it. Like Tuesday and King, Ava experienced unwelcoming and racist remarks in her rural school, and she had to decide how she wanted to handle it. She described instances where students made anti-Asian jokes at her expense. Comments that resembled a certain stereotype, such as saying her lunch must have contained cat meat, or snarkily asking if she could really be Asian if she got less than an A on a math test. She described her reactions to these jokes. Usually I play it off, but honestly, it hurts, especially since it's always the same overused jokes. And I don't really show the hurt because my school was predominantly white. And if you can't take the joke, you're not cool or you're sensitive. Ava didn't want to deal with the repercussions of having to defend herself by herself, so she acted like the jokes were fine, a form of uncomfortable self-defense most people have who have been the butt of ridicule, especially racially charged ridicule, can relate to. These experiences were worsened by the fact that teachers didn't do anything to stop the racist remarks from occurring, even though they heard it. Sometimes teachers would say, "Oh, that's so mean of you to say," but they never stopped it, ever. I asked her, "Do you still feel engaged in that classroom after the teacher hasn't stepped in to say anything? Does your relationship with that teacher change?" Ava responded, "Honestly, no. I don't know why. But even though the comments hurt me, I make a point to forget about it, just because, honestly, I don't really know why. I just feel like it wouldn't be very beneficial for me if I disengage from talking to those people or learning from those teachers because I feel like it's just how they hear. It's normal. And there's not much I can do as a person to change it because there are probably 2 Asians throughout my entire school, and my peers don't really understand. And I see that they're brought up that way. There's a lot of ignorance going around. For many people, this would be an almost supernatural level of calm to assess that it wouldn't benefit her to disengage from her classes, to see the context for why the people are treating her that way, and to decide that, for her at least, trying to change the environment is just not worth it. For students who are able to get involved in coordinated efforts for equity advocacy, like Vivian and Ian, who advocated for equity in their schools via their extracurricular activities, pushing to make positive change in their schools and communities was meaningful and energizing. But for a student like Ava, where the school environment and lack of allies within it made it such an uphill battle to make change, choosing to ignore these remarks was the best solution. Additionally, she sought out extracurricular opportunities to escape this unwelcoming environment, which are described more in a few pages. Connor. We were all working together as one equal group. Connor has stories in every section of this chapter because he focused so much on the importance of student voice and exercised his own voice in a variety of ways. One of the ways he did this was through his involvement in a statewide student-led group called the Kentucky Student Voice Team. He originally discovered this group when he was serving as a student advisor on his local school board. KSVT came to present to the board and he got interested in their work and joined their online communication channel. Several months later, around May 2020, KSVT started a project called Coping with COVID-19, which involved surveying students from across the state and analyzing the results. It took about 13,000 students surveyed across all of the Kentucky high schools. They looked at all the data for it and needed people to analyze it, to kind of sit down and work with researchers that were pulling from the University of Kentucky to try to really figure out how students are reacting to the pandemic and to understand things like what their home life looks like, how do they feel about their education, how do they feel about their future. Just trying to pull out these major themes that kind of got buried in the general narrative of, oh, students are having so much learning loss, they're losing out on their math and reading skills. Instead, this study focused on the more social, emotional aspects of what's going on, more on motivation, engagement, and mental health. This project was his real starting point with the voice team. What was really unique about this project to Connor was that although there were several experts involved, PhDs, postdocs from the University of Kentucky, the high school students had as much of a voice in what methods were used and the interpretations they made from the data as the professional researchers did. As he described it, we were all working together as one equal group. It wasn't like the experts were the ones who made all the decisions. The simultaneous empowerment of how they did the project, along with the relevance of what they were trying to accomplish, made it a particularly meaningful extracurricular to participate in. The shared power in this project stood in sharp contrast, in Connor's mind, to other student voice activities he'd participated in. Connor's experience with a teacher who incorporated student interests into the design of her assignments and activities as described in Chapter 2 opened his eyes to the fact that I should have a say in my education. So he started to get involved with this school system locally by becoming a student advisor to the school board, where he and other involved students were supposed to act as a liaison between the district and the student body. Unfortunately, this opportunity didn't lead to the kind of meaningful change he had hoped for by getting involved. It felt very tokenizing. It felt like we weren't getting any meaningful work done, and it felt like we weren't affecting change or helping our communities in any way. And I didn't feel comfortable with that. Connor describes several experiences when the board would ask for student input, but then do nothing in response to that input. He said it felt like their reply to anything he and the other students was, "We hear you, we empathize with you, we really do care, but we're going to change absolutely nothing about what we're doing." Or as Connor summarized it with an exasperated laugh, "I hear you, I see you, eat shit."
Thank you so much, Grace and Becca, both of you, for those readings and those different perspectives, which I think is such a natural part of a co-authored book, and I think is what makes it so special of an opportunity to put that together and to share it with people. So thank you both for that reading. At this time, we do have time for our audience Q&A. So if anyone has a question for one or more of our authors, go ahead and type those in the chat and I'll make sure they get asked. We've got a couple questions to start. This first question is for all three authors. What has been the most rewarding part of sharing your research and or experiences through these books? So maybe if we could go in reading order. So David, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yes, absolutely. The most rewarding part, really for me, is when I get feedback from individuals who've read the story. A couple of weeks ago, a young man sent me an email through my website, and he said he pretty much thanked me for writing the book, and he told me he was really glad that that he read it because he was also on the autism spectrum. So to get feedback from someone who could really relate to the story meant a lot to me. And aside from the feedback from individuals, just hearing that they enjoyed the story and that they got value from the story, just when I was doing my research and putting this story together, I also learned a lot too. So that was kind of the win-win. That was really the win-win for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about seeing yourself in books, and I think actually this relates to both of the readings, but there's just something so important, and I can see how just experiencing that along with people could be so rewarding as the author. Becca, what about you? What have you found to be most rewarding about this experience?
I think very similar to what you were just sharing, David, in the research itself, the opportunity to talk with young people from all over the country was just amazing. I think a lot of times, especially as adults and as parents, we can sometimes fall in the trap of thinking that teens and young people are like a different species, and it's not the case. And they had such amazing, and empowering stories to share about the ways that they worked with very difficult and non-supportive systems to still put things together. And that was amazing to hear, and certainly gave me lots of ideas as a parent that I hadn't had before to support my own tweens and teens. And then in terms of putting the book out there, I would say the most rewarding thing is just like you were describing, David. It's been wonderful to hear from people that have, picked up something that they didn't, that surprised them, that informed them, that gave them an idea. And the readers who have reached out and said, wow, I hadn't thought of this, or I read this one part of it to my kid, and now we have this idea that we didn't have before, or I sent this over to my brother because his son is feeling really disengaged in high school, and even though he's in a different school system in another country, he's finding it helpful, right? So those kinds of stories of, the reason Grace and I put this together was to be helpful to people, right? We weren't trying to become like insta famous or something like that. We just wanted to be helpful. So that's been the most rewarding part for me.
Yeah, I'm just every time that you talk about this, and I'm sure a lot of people feel this way, but every time, as part of this book, all the research that went into it and all the interviews, um, I'm just struck by how that must have felt for the interviewees to feel heard that way and to feel like their opinion mattered. So I'm just so happy to hear that was so rewarding on the interviewer's side as well. Grace, it might be similar, but what did you find to be most rewarding about this process?
Yeah, I would say I resonate a lot with what David and Becca has already mentioned. I think to provide an answer that might be slightly different but still adjacent and connected would probably be having a product, um, or having, yeah, a product, a book that I think very much aligns with my values and how I see us like as a community of people like connect with each other. And that was something that I think when Becca first came to me with this idea of the book, that was really the core focus of the purpose of this book, is to be able to explain to other folks who may not understand or want to understand, like people my age, like where we're coming from, be able to bridge and connect those sort of generational divides. That's, I think, is what is really rewarding for me. um yeah, I mean, I think there's just so many other things, like the sort of value of understanding that young people are and can be multifaceted, I think is what this book allows young people to be. And being able to actually see that come to fruition, not just in the publication of the book, but also, like everyone else has said, like interviewing and talking to people, the research that went behind it. to sort of back up the idea that people are multifaceted, young people are multifaceted, and can continue to be multifaceted is, I would say, is really rewarding.
Yeah, again, it's just I think this is a idea that needs to be more prevailing. So I'm not surprised to hear that whatsoever. I think that's wonderful just to hear from both of you about that. We've got another question for, again, all three authors. I think actually, Becca, you touched on this a little bit, but for all three of you, have you learned something about yourself through the process of writing these books, even in writing about other people or other characters? Becca, since I think you did touch on this a little bit, do you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think so. To expand on it a little bit, I mean, I learned a bunch of things, but I would not go on for an hour. The particular one that I was referencing is that I came in, especially, I've been in education for over 2 decades, and I came in with a fair degree of cynicism, honestly. I was concerned that the only thing that I would hear from young people was about everything that was not working, broken, unsupportive in the education system. And so I was delighted and surprised to learn how many more options and possibilities there were inside the public school system now than there had been before. Not in all districts and not equally for all people. There is still a long way to go. But that there were a lot more options that young people have been able to identify for themselves and make the most of. And that it wasn't just the groups of young people with the most resources and the most privileges who were able to do that. And that gave me a lot of hope, both as an individual parent, that I could help my kids find those kinds of options, and also hope as an educator and researcher that we can, there's still more progress to make, but that we have made progress and that is making a meaningful difference for at least some people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's still a long way for public education to go, of course, but there are also positive developments that have been happening and ideally will continue to happen. Grace, what about you? Something that you were learning about yourself or perhaps unexpectedly learned about something through the process of writing this book?
For sure. I'm kind of giggling to myself because I'm thinking one thing that I learned about myself was that I'm not the center of the universe in the sense that um there's so much that I can relate to, especially in the initial parts of interviewing young people. There's so much that I could relate to each of the participants on different levels and on different levels. And it made me realize that a lot of our experiences are shared, and it made me feel more whole in that way, in the sense that like we are in a community, even if like we don't necessarily live in the same place, even if we're, don't look like each other. There are a lot of shared experiences, obviously to varying degrees, but there is a lot of shared experiences. And so I think that's something I learned about myself, is that I learned to take myself out of it, and be able to see how we are, in a very cliche way, we're all connected. But in reality, there is a lot of, as much as there are differences, there are as well a lot of commonalities.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche for a reason, right? That's a beautiful thing to be able to take away from that process. David, what about you? Have you learned something about yourself through the process of writing this book, or were you surprised to learn something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a couple of things that I learned. Some I really wasn't that surprised about. Just the impact that's taken place across the country when it comes to law enforcement and in society dealing with individuals with, whether it's special needs or individuals who have some type of mental health problem. Just coming across the numerous stories of law enforcement having challenges with engaging engaging individuals who have autism, and unfortunately, in some cases, it ends up with those individuals, teenagers being shot when their parents have called the police for help. So to me that's a big problem. That's something that I learned. I did not realize that was so common. But just as importantly, what I also learned is how important, and it really, this probably just more re-emphasized, but what I learned is how much what I know that whatever I want to write, I want it to have an impact on people. Whether it was my first book that I wrote that had the theme of friendship, the importance of friendship, especially as an adult, how it's important for me to write something that's not only entertaining, that's not something that will only keep someone's attention, through 250 pages, but also to give them some type of value. So when they're done, it's not that, hey, that was a good story, but hey, I learned something about the special needs community. So really, by writing this book, that's not something new that I learned, but it does reemphasize that was really important for me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes the things that we really realize, even in writing fiction about real life, can be really jarring or just, cause some sort of shift in perspective. And I think that's a really important part of the writing process too, whether it is fiction or nonfiction or whatever it may be. So we do have one more question. This is again for all three authors. What do you wish you had known about the writing slash research slash publication process before you started writing your book? Grace, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yeah, I could start us off. Um, I'll probably want to edit my answer after hearing like David and Becca's answer, but um, I started this book project with Becca when I was 18. And I'm 21 now, and I think those are very, not long years, but they're short years in which you learn a lot. Like I learned a lot about myself within those years. Um, I would I would say I wasn't expecting how long the process would be. Obviously, like I started so young, I was very naive about like how the, publication process would be or just like writing a book would be. Now as someone who is closer to maybe like grad school than I am to high school, I am a lot more familiar about how arduous or not arduous, but just like long the process of writing a book and publication can be. Having friends who are um, pursuing like master's or PhD programs, like that is something that I am more grounded in and understanding. But when I was 18, I was like, oh, what do you mean? It's going to take a long time. It's fine. But I would say that's definitely something I wasn't expecting. But good things take time, I think. But
So true, but I think that's a big thing. A lot of authors, first-time authors especially, the timeline can be kind of surprising. So um, I totally see where that's coming from. David, what about you? What do you wish you had known before writing this book, or before the research, or um, the publication process? Any of that? What do you wish you had known before all that started?
Right. This was my second book, and I kind of thought from my first one that I would have, had all the, to-dos written down and ready to go. But the fact that it's such a long process, it always feels like it felt like I was almost starting over again with the second book, because there were still things that I didn't know. And what I realize now, for me, the thing I want to highlight is really just not just the publication process, but the marketing process, just how hard it is to get the word out to people about your story, about your book. Even if it's because it's more than just sharing it on social media, especially when individuals are bombarded with so many different pieces of information coming at them. So that's really something that I'm still trying to solve. And even though I'm learning and I'm getting a lot of help from different ways about getting the word out, to me that's something that I really still learning. I wish I could say I already knew the answer, but it's such a big, it's such a vast audience out there, where if when I think about getting my story to individuals across the country, across all 50 states, it's more than hitting send on an email or on Facebook. And that's, to me, the challenge that I'm still trying to learn. Even though I've learned a lot, I probably have 10% of the and 90% left a way to go.
Yeah, it's a daunting part of the process for sure. So it's, that what you say about it's constantly learning, I think that there's a lot of weight to that for sure. And Becca, what's one thing you wish you had known before you started writing this book?
Yeah, like David, I've written books before, so I expected the length. I all those pieces, like David as well, the marketing stuff is still it's harder now than it was even 5, 10 years ago because there's so much more noise online. So I'm gonna take it down to like a really teeny tiny thing, but this might help other authors in the future. I wish I had known that Amazon prohibits you, related to marketing, prohibits you from running advertising on a book that has even an obfuscated curse word like ours does, where we've replaced the curse word with the asterisk to make it cleaner. It could all be symbols, anything that even references a curse word. Amazon will not allow you to run that for. And that's one of the key ways to be able to market your book and get your book in front of people and keep it high in the rankings. You will run ads, and we can't. And so that's a small thing, but it's a thing that I really wish that I had known. We picked the title based on what a student had asked of a colleague, but and to really have student voice be front and center, starting with the title and going all the way through the book. But in retrospect, I wish that I'd known that and changed the title slightly to allude to what the student said instead of directly quoting what the student said, so that we were not being deliberately suppressed in all the search algorithms. So that's a small tactical thing, but a small tactical thing that makes a big difference.
Right. And I mean, what you said about there's so much noise online now, it really is the big question mark of the publishing industry as things get more and more saturated, how to stand out. And sometimes the thing that makes you stand out can, in this case, perhaps have an unintended effect in other ways. So it's a constant maze a little bit. Um, so this is actually the last question because I think this is a great one. So I want to be able to pose it to all of you. But for the last question, what is your next writing project? David, do you want to start us off with this one?
Yes. I have a I have a screenplay that I wrote several years ago when I was interested in the movie industry, and it's this is actually more of a adventurous type story. Even though I want to make sure that the whatever I write has some type of real value, a true theme someone can grasp on, and that's kind of what I'm been brainstorming right now. How do I put some good themes into this screenplay that I wrote several years ago, so it's not just a adventure story where it has some real takeaways from it.
Yeah, I love the idea of that kind of blending those different, maybe not necessarily different, but I guess varying aspects of a book into one thing. Becca, what about you? What's next for you as a writer?
I'm working on a sort of half journal, half workbook that follows on the themes from our research book to just have something practical and easy to use for anybody, teens or adults, because Grace and I have had some folks ask for something like that, go with the book. So that's something I'm working on right now.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I love the idea of almost like a companion in that way. I think that would be fantastic. And Grace, what about you closing us out? Next for you as a writer?
My next writing project is a writing assignment due tonight for my introduction to creative writing class. But generally, I would say my next writing project would probably something far in the future. I've been considering like a PhD program, so like MD PhD. So that's going to be something far in the future, but that's something that's kind of percolating in my mind right now.
Yeah, really exciting stuff. I love to hear all these kind of diverse next projects and really excited to see what develops for all three of you. But I just want to say at this point that it was so wonderful to hear these books come alive in your own voices. So thank you so much to David, Becca, and Grace for being generous with your time, your books today, your thoughts in this Q&A. And thank you to the audience members for joining us and celebrating these authors with us as well. Don't forget that you can order What Are We Going to Do with Tyrone Jr. and Can You Help Me Give a Shit? Unlocking Teen Motivation in School and Life from the links that I'll put in the chat one more time for everyone. Please also consider checking out atmospherepress.com to browse our new and forthcoming releases, sign up for our email newsletter, or submit a book manuscript of your own. You can submit your work to books@atmospherepress.com and just let us know that you attended today's event. We'll look forward to hearing from you. And until then, that's it. So have a great rest of your week, everyone.